Dear colleagues, we are beginning the press conference of the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov. It will take place in the Russian language. There will be translation provided into 3 other languages. After the introductory remarks, you will have an opportunity to ask your questions. Please identify yourself before asking your question. On to the Minister. Good morning, dear colleagues. As has already become our tradition, we meet at the beginning of the new year in order to discuss the events and outcomes of the year 2022, which was not easy and to a certain extent unique, because in 2022 profound tendencies in geopolitics, in international aspirations of the leading countries have become even more clear. These trends have been developing for decades. Naturally, our Western colleagues were trying to turn Ukraine and the situation around it into the main event for the media, as well as in politics and economics. They accused Russia of so-called aggression against Ukraine, alleging that it was the reason behind all the woes in global economy. I won't even waste my breath trying to refute these claims, because the statistics of the World Bank and the IMF, as well as the FAO and other international structures have been indicating that the crisis had been developing even before the beginning of the special military operation, and President Putin had given data about the situation in the world economy being entirely due to the selfish position of the United States and its allies. What is going on in Ukraine at the moment arose from the United States and its satellites' years-long preparation to starting a global hybrid war against the Russian Federation. And no one is even trying to disguise that. If you read statements by Western politicians, political scientists, you can easily see that for yourself. A few days ago, professor of the University of Columbia was published, and he said we were not in a cold war with Russia. He said we are in a hot war with Russia, and NATO is fighting Russia in Ukraine. These confessions are quite obvious. They are on the surface level, and it is bizarre to see various attempts to deny that. And President Milanovic of Croatia recently said that it was NATO's war. He was frank and honest when he said that. A few weeks ago, Henry Kissinger, before calling upon the world calling upon NATO to make Ukraine another member, in one of his most recent articles, he said that what was going on in Ukraine was a clash and competition between 2 nuclear powers for control over this territory. I believe it is quite clear what this was all about. That is why when our Western partners foam at the mouth, trying to prove that they have nothing to do with that, they only try to help Ukraine overcome aggression and restore its territorial integrity, they are not being entirely truthful. The amount of their military support testify that the West is banking a lot on this war against Russia. It is quite clear because the events in Ukraine shed light on the United States' desire to seize, trying using legitimate means to strengthen its world positions and take up illegitimate methods for ensuring its dominance. They spare no effort It's not just what we see in Ukraine. They also destroyed all those mechanisms that the West, headed by the US, created, the mechanisms of the free market, loyal competition, free entrepreneurship, presumption of innocence, inviolability of private property, everything that the Western globalization model was founded on has collapsed. And right now, sanctions are being used against Russia and other undesirable states simply because they refuse to comply with their ideas. But tomorrow, these sanctions can be used against any other country that refuses to blindly follow American orders. As for the European Union, I don't think we need to speak about that. For a long time, the EU is now completely following the American dictate, and this process that has been fomenting for a few years has recently culminated in a joint declaration between NATO and the EU. It happened on the 10th of January, and the declaration said that NATO and the EU will use all of their economic and military means in the interests of the Golden Billion, in the interests of our 1 billion of citizens of NATO and EU countries. According to Borrell, the rest of the world is the jungle that is in the way of the development of this blossoming garden, and this jungle needs to be reformatted, needs to be turned into a colony of the new formation and get resources from them using new methods. Blackmail, demonization and sanctions, threat of use of force, those are some of the methods they use to achieve their goals. The West has taken up the policy of destroying the traditional ties between historic partners in various parts of the world and destabilization of various regions. We see it in the Balkans, in the post-Soviet space, especially if we consider the activities of the United States and its acolytes and clients in South Caucasus, and naturally everything that is going on in Ukraine that has been developing for a long time. For example, in 2004, when the first Maidan took place, European officials said for the first time, Ukraine needs to choose. Is it with the West or is it with Russia? This either-or policy has been visible in the West's policy regarding this region in a consistent manner, and those who made the wrong choice and wanted historic ties and brotherhood traditions and religious ties with Russia matter. Initially, the West would crush them. They would try to exclude them from political life. They would prosecute them. They would assassinate journalists and politicians. They would shut down media outlets if they refused to spread the official position. The police state used all means available, and right now the process is over with the silent approval of the West. And the alternative choice, either or, West or Russia, were needed to identify those who were against the West, who were not with the West. And the West started punishing these people. And let's get back to the declaration. It's an interesting paper indeed. And the EU and NATO were proclaimed to be an alliance of democracies against autocracies amid global competition. This confrontational agenda was proclaimed for the entire world to hear. And just like I have already pointed out, Europe has lost its independence. And the joint declaration explicitly states that Europeans are subjugated to NATO, essentially containing an obligation to serve American interests in geopolitical containment of Russia and China. They also proclaimed the goal that was well known to everyone, but now they put it on paper, achieving global superiority of NATO headed by the United States. NATO does not restrict itself to simply organizing Europe. During the Madrid summit that took place in June 2022, they proclaimed global responsibility of this military bloc, especially when it comes to the Asia-Pacific region, that NATO chooses to call the Indo-Pacific. Here the attempt is clear. They are trying to involve India in this process in order to further complicate their relations with China. Moreover, they also proclaimed indivisibility of security in the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific. A play upon words. Previously, in the OSCE and the Russia-NATO Council, starting from 1990s, we would speak about indivisibility of security, which meant equal security for each state, and the obligation not to strengthen your security at the expense of the security of others. This term is now used out of context and has taken on a new meaning, the indivisibility of security interests of NATO and the Indo-Pacific. The difference is clear for everyone. The so-called Indo-Pacific, the West has embarked upon the path of creating a bloc against Russia and China. In order to do that, they have been consistently destroying various mechanisms and cooperation mechanisms that have been created in ASEAN on the basis of equality, consensus, balance of interests. They substitute them with military blocs. AUKUS is a bright example of that, an Anglo-Saxon bloc in Asia, the US, the UK, and Australia. They actively involved Japan in this bloc, and Prime Minister Kishida's recent visit to Washington became the culmination of this policy. Japan has once again embarked upon the path of militarization. They are going to change and amend its constitution, in particular the articles that prevented it from doing that. The process has started. I'm not going to go into detail about the activities of the West at other geopolitical tracks, but speaking briefly about the position of the United States and the West that we consider to be the main problem creating difficulties everywhere, it can be summed up as follows. Washington's line of ensuring dictate in international affairs means the following. We Americans are allowed to do whatever we want, wherever we want, even if it's at the other end of the world. We will do what we deem necessary, and you, all others, cannot do anything without our consent, even if you respond to direct threats to your securities that we create at your borders. I'm simplifying it, of course. Just like Napoleon mobilized the entirety of Europe against the Russian Empire, just like Hitler mobilized most European countries and made them fight against the Soviet Union, the US has now shaped a coalition, including virtually all European countries, both NATO member states, and others, including EU member states. And now they are waging a war by proxy against Russia, using Ukraine as a proxy, in order to solve the Russian matter, just like Hitler wanted to find a final solution to the Jewish problem. They are doing the same right now. If we read statements by politicians, not only from Baltic states, but also some more moderate ones, they say that Russia needs to be defeated on the strategical level. Political scientists from various media outlets speak about decolonizing Russia, alleging that Russia is too big and is in the way. A few days ago, I read an article published in The Telegraph calling upon the world to liberate Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Transnistria, leaving Karelia, Königsberg, and Kurils up to negotiations. Of course, it's a tabloid. And sometimes we are forced to read such tabloids because they make headlines from time to time. But no one in the West, and such remarks are very numerous, including in our non-systemic opposition. No one among Western politicians refutes such claims.
President Macron, in addition to his project of the European political community, which has been directly proclaimed to be the format where all Europeans, except for Ukrainians and Belarusians, will be invited to. Now I've heard a new idea that he pitched to call a European state conference. An invitation will be received by the EU, Eastern Partnership participants, that is Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, as well as Moldova, Ukraine, and Belarus. I doubt that they will invite Belarus. Still, it was said it would be the EU, Eastern Partnership countries, plus, and I'd like to point it out here, immigrants from the Russian Federation, which are actively engaged in politics abroad. Also, it was said not in the presentation by President Macron, but in the comments that followed later, that this event, the Conference of the European States, could also invite separate regions of the Russian Federation, which intend to maintain their ties with Europe. I think it's clear what we're talking about. The situation is far from black and white as it is painted by our Western colleagues. It reflects the general line towards global dominance, an absolute submission of everyone, with a threat of punishment, as you can see. None of the Western politicians is talking about nothing but sanctions. Right now in Davos, Ursula von der Leyen, yet again, was threatening us and Belarus with new sanctions. We know how to introduce more sanctions, how to suffocate Russian economy, for it to be brought back into recession for decades. That's what we're talking about. Well, there is a saying that the masks are off, and for the longest time, when there were discussions at the UN Security Council about sanctions, about a country which would probably violate their international obligations, and At that point, every time the Western countries who initiated these sanctional measures, they were saying that the sanctions are not for punishing the nation, the population of the state. These are sanctions against the regimes. So where are these assurances now? The sanctions against Russia are openly declared to be aimed at the people conducting a revolution against the current leaders of Russia. No holds are barred, no one is observing any politeness rules here anymore. Well, this frenzied attempt and this response, by hook or by crook, using barred holds to ensure the domination of the U.S. and the rest of the world, the rest of the West that Washington has completely steamrolled over. This frenzy shows that historically they're acting on the wrong side of history. And in essence are trying to stop the formation of the multipolar world. And that is not happening by decisions from cabinets in Potomac or on the Potomac River or... Well, this is happening just naturally because countries are developing economically. Take China, take India, our strategic partners. Look at Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, Egypt, many other countries that have great potential. For example, in Africa, they have tremendous reserves of raw materials. There are new centers of economic growth being formed, and the West is trying to hinder that, using the mechanisms that were created to serve their interests through the globalization that was created by them. And here, the role of the dollar as a reserve currency is one of the main roles to play. Therefore, now, in our context with the SCO and within BRICS and other associations, CIS, naturally, Eurasian Economic Union as well as in with cooperation with associations with Asia, Africa, and Latin America, they're trying to build new forms of interaction so as not to depend on the West. And now it's clear, neocolonial methods. President Putin has spoken about that very clearly. These methods are being used to plunder the rest of the world. Now, in new conditions, we, together with our reliable partners, with friendly countries, will build such interaction that would benefit us and will be exempt from the influence from those who would like to subjugate the rest of the world. These are my evaluations of the past year. The main thing is that the processes that this year saw, they were incepted many years ago. It wasn't yesterday, and this process will continue to unravel because the shaping of the multipolar world, its finalization of the relations that are required for democracy in the world and justice to reign in the world, for the UN Charter to be observed about respect for sovereign equality of all states. That would take time. The UN Charter is a great foundation. When it was adopted, it was indeed a revolutionary document. Unfortunately, all those right principles were distorted by the West. The West did not respect the sovereign equality principle. They did not respect non-interference in domestic affairs principle, peaceful settling of disputes, and so on. Hundreds of times after the UN was created, the U.S. have used their armed forces abroad, in the majority of cases, in blatant violation of the UN Charter. Therefore, the process of multipolar world taking shape will take time. That will be a whole historical era. Right now, we're in the middle of this process. Sometimes it's hard to see when you're inside the process. Therefore, we keep in touch, we exchange opinions and evaluations, and we appreciate that. That goes not only to our partners in foreign countries, but also to our colleagues from the media. Your observations and even the questions that you're asking us are very useful. So let's move on to your questions then. RIA Novosti, please. Thank you very much. Christina Lund Rodriguez, RIA Novosti. Mr. Minister, how do you evaluate the chances that this year will be possible to organize negotiations between Russia and the leading Western countries led by the U.S. dedicated to Ukraine? What questions of ensuring security as part of the Ukrainian settlement would Moscow like to put on the table for these negotiations? Do you think that it will be possible that this year, this active phase, the military phase will stop this year? As for the military phase and active phase, our military and our president have commented on that multiple times, and he confirmed yet again that the special military operation has its goals. They're not just invented or taken out of thin air, but they are defined by the deeply rooted and legitimate interests in security of the Russian Federation, the interests of the Russian position in the world and our nearest neighborhood. Ukraine, just like any other territory that is bordering Russia, there should be no military, should have no military infrastructure that poses a direct military threat to Russia. In Ukraine, there should be no discrimination and persecution aimed against our compatriots who happened to be Ukrainian citizens, but like to maintain their language, culture, and traditions, and would like to bring up their children in these traditions. And I would like to highlight, in full compliance with the Constitution of the Ukraine, which states that Ukraine guarantees free development and protection of Russian and other languages of the ethnic minorities in the Ukraine. Russian is mentioned there specifically. This constitution is still in place. As far as I understand, we have handout materials. Okay, so they were circulated yesterday. So we have materials circulating that mention the articles of the Constitution and specific Ukrainian commitments according to international conventions. We also have a hefty list of the laws that were adopted in the violation of both the Constitution and the international obligations of the Ukrainian state. Some time ago, about several months ago, I was surprised to read an interview by President Zelensky. He spoke on the topic that if they let Russia win, then other big countries would think that they can do that too. And there are many such countries and different continents. Therefore, such countries will suffocate small countries, will divvy up the rest. And I, said Zelensky, I would like to see a different scenario when each person on the planet would know that regardless of where he lives, he has the same kind of rights and he's protected just like any person in the world. So this was said by a person, the interview took place in October. And in September, in 2021, a year before that, Zelensky, as you know, said that in the East there are just species, not people. And if any citizens of Ukraine thinks in Russian language and would like to stay Russian, then for the benefit of his children and grandchildren, he should move out to Russia. So this was said by the same person who said that he has a dream about equality and so that everyone could live the way he wants. It's clear that these beautiful words are said for the benefit of the West, but that gives us a great picture of the current regime, and it's clear why we cannot abandon the foundational, the basic goals of the special military operation. As for the outlook for the negotiations, we've discussed it dozens of times. I don't want to repeat some platitudes, starting with March, when we reciprocated Ukraine's appeal for negotiations. Moreover, we supported the draft settlement document proposed by Ukraine, but Ukraine was stopped. It was told it was too early. And after the spring of this year, throughout the summer and the fall, special representatives were saying that everywhere that it's too early to move to negotiations, that Ukraine needs more armaments for it to start its negotiation with a greater initial ask. NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg said that this is the path to peace. And Zelensky is pitching very strange initiatives, 10-point plans with everything heaped over: food security, energy security, biosecurity, withdrawal of Russian troops from everywhere, Russian repentance, tribunal, condemnation, and so on and so forth. There could be no negotiation with Zelensky because he prohibited it by law to hold negotiations with the Russian government. So all of this Western talk that they are allegedly prepared, but Russia is not, well, this is not entire truth. You asked about the outlook for negotiations between Russia and the West. We will be prepared for any serious proposals. We'll be prepared to respond to them, and we see no serious proposals as of now, but we'll be prepared to review them and to think about it. We see the mantra from the Western capitals that Ukraine should not be discussed without the presence of Ukraine. And this is just gibberish, because the West decides for Ukraine. They banned Zelensky from negotiating with Russia at the end of March last year, when there was a prepared agreement. So the West is deciding, and it decided that for Ukraine, without Ukraine. They're saying it's not the time. There should be more armaments. We should weaken Russia more. I don't know who's in charge of the military planning there, but there was a meeting between CIA Director Bill Burns and Sergei Naryshkin, Director of SVR Russia. He spoke about the meeting in general terms. It was proposed by President Biden, and President Putin agreed. This meeting took place. There were no revelations made there. In general, the West, in some sporadic contacts that happen at this or that level, does not say anything that would go beyond its public statements. Our position is well known. But talking to the West about Ukraine only makes no sense, really. The West is using Ukraine to dismantle the security system that used to exist in Euro-Atlantic region for many years. It was underpinned by the principle of consensus, indivisibility of security, solving all issues through dialogue and cooperation. And the embodiment of these principles were the OSCE. Right now, the West is trying to bury it as soon as possible, just as it has buried the Council of Europe. Organizations that were created for dialogue and for finding consensus, for finding compromise, by definition, are now being used to promote the very line towards total domination of the U.S. with the rest of the West under them. So saying to us that, okay, let's do something about Ukraine, but the rest will be ours. Well, no, that would not go. We would have to have a frank conversation. And I don't think that at this stage we need to show any initiative in those dimensions that the West has closed down. They closed down cooperation in the Council of Europe that everyone was so proud of. Besides, Council of Europe has several dozen conventions that do not require a country to be a member of the Council of Europe, but allow you to take part in those, to be party to that convention. And here, the West decided to discriminate against Russia once again and prevent our representatives from taking part in the bodies of those conventions which are open for non-members. In this situation, our representatives have no chance of taking part in review events, and in these conditions, we are impossible to act in. Therefore, we have exited out of the criminal law convention on corruption. That doesn't mean that we don't want to fight corruption, but that means that we don't want to be disregarded by the West and admonished by the West in that format when we don't even have procedural rights. I can give you plenty of examples, but let's move on to make it a bit more lively. Other questions, please. Greece, please. Open TV.
Афанасий Евгеньевич, Open TV, Греция. Вы знаете, существует такое мнение среди многих европейцев, что Россия не проявила свою лучшую сторону, решая пойти на военные действия. Ну и что таким образом выступает как остальные империалистические страны, допустим, Соединенные Штаты, которые упомянули, которые, кстати, разбомбили почти половину планеты, что таким же образом нарушает международное право, действуя таким образом, чтобы захватить определенные территории. И, знаете, такая критика очень слышим в Греции, на Кипре, на Балканах, упомянули Балканы, в связи с тем, что мы тоже жертвы такой политики. Вы изучили знатоков, наверное, кипрского вопроса. Есть угрозы в Эгейском море со стороны Турции против Греции. И вот такая формулировка, такая аргументация очень у нас звучит. Как бы поспорили, если можно, с такой позицией?
Я не то, что буду спорить, я просто
Well, it's not that I'm going to refute this position. I'm going to express my own opinion when they say that Russia did not put its best foot forward when it started the special military operation. I would say that this is a very interesting turn of phrase. But, you know, just to dot all the I's, I think we put our best foot forward once the USSR disappeared, and this was mentioned by President Putin on many occasions. In 2000, when he was first elected as president, one of the first visits was to Germany, where he spoke in Bundestag, he spoke German, and in doing so, he personally, as a person, a human being, as President Putin, he committed himself to a historic reconciliation between Germany and our country, and this reconciliation dated back to the end of 1980s, beginning of 1990s, once the Berlin Wall fell, but that was at the official level, at the state level, whereas President Putin made a personal human contribution to this historic reconciliation between the two countries. Don't forget that Germany reunited to a large extent thanks to the USSR position, because other the countries, the allied nations were not that enthusiastic about that. And we were putting our best foot forward, as you put it, from the point of view of international law, from the point of view of searching for solutions that would benefit the whole humankind. And we've been doing that for quite some time. I cited the first Ukrainian Maidan back in 2004. The official Europe back then said that the Ukraine was up for a choice, either Europe or something else, but that was 3 years before the Munich speech, and we were hopeful back then that reason would prevail and Europe would understand that it was impossible to constantly lie, to constantly push NATO eastward, despite the assurances that had been provided that it would and was impossible to do that, not just despite the assurances given in private, but also due to the obligations under the OSCE principles, when you shouldn't reinforce your security at the expense of other security, and when no one can, claim dominance. And these are the principles that are enshrined in the OSCE, and Russia and Europe are part of that. And the very same formula has been enshrined in the documents adopted at the NATO-Russia Council at the highest level. And if you think that reckless NATO push eastward, despite our official remonstrance, is the implementation of this very obligation, when I think it's not going to be possible for us to reach common understanding. But I think you understand full well what I'm talking about. You said that we acted as the other imperialist nations. Right now, we are often, once again, dubbed an empire, but it's up to the experts, to professionals, to speculate on that. We're a nation, a country, which is home to many nationalities and ethnic groups. We have 150 or so languages. All the world religions are represented among our population. We have respect for national traditions of each and every ethnic group. And as a multi-ethnic, multi-religious country, we have been developing, following this pattern for centuries. And unlike Western colonial practices, we have never suppressed nations that were part of the Russian Empire. And we never destroyed them, never tried to put them into a melting pot for them to lose identity, national culture, to become, as Americans, one homogeneous nation. Even Americans failed to do that, and we never sought that. We managed to preserve our national traditions, national identity, specificities, our national languages. As far as the conquest of territories is concerned, as far as what you said, that we have the same very instincts as Western empires, I would say the following. As I mentioned, the U.S., after the end of the Cold War, well, let's take 1990. After that, the U.S. invaded other territories for 300 times or so. And why did they do that? Either because someone offended the Americans. This happens regularly in Central America or in the Caribbean. Or they sought to eliminate threats to peace and security. To cite an example, Saddam Hussein, who allegedly was in possession of WMDs, which turned out to be a fabrication, or Libya, when they wanted to eliminate Gaddafi, who was not a democrat but a dictator. So they destroyed prosperous countries who were not that bad from the point of view of the economic development. Let's take Yugoslavia. They simply decided to dismantle the Balkans, in particular to please Germany. They did not
wait for a coordinated line by the EU. They simply recognized Slovenia and Croatia, which made it impossible to rebuild any kind of confederation in the Balkans. Serbia was against that. It was against the idea of the Balkans submitting to the West. So what did they do? Incidentally, when Joseph Biden was still senator, a year prior to the NATO aggression against Serbia in 1997, he said, I am in favor of bombing Belgrade. I suggest American pilots have to go and destroy all the bridges across the Drina. I suggest that we take all their oil reserves, just, to take away that from them. And, as you see, all the proposals of Senator Biden were implemented a year after, and the Time was published a new edition, and it had a cover saying, through mass bombings to democracy. And back then, not a single person was thinking about a tribunal. Or when the US invaded Syria without any legitimate cause, starting to raise cities to the ground, cities were destroyed, eliminated. Raqqa was razed to the ground, bodies were piled up, and they stayed in the streets for months. Yes, there was some reports by Médecins Sans Frontières, by others, but never was a tribunal proposed. But when the International Court itself decided to look into potential military crimes that might have been committed by the American military in Afghanistan, the US said that we're going to slap sanctions on you, we'll take away your money, and this high institution of international justice decided to keep mum. Yes, you can draw a comparison, that's true, but as I said, we have been protecting our own security, because Ukraine was being turned into a bridgehead to undermine our interests in the Sea of Azov. There were plans to build military naval bases, Anglo-Saxon bases in particular, and these are serious threats. Secondly, the humiliation of Russians that allegedly have to have their rights protected under the Ukrainian constitution. And this humiliation was inadmissible because they associate the protection with us, the protection of their legitimate interests. When in 2014 a West-inspired coup d'etat happened, they didn't even make an effort to build a national dialogue. The West sided with the regime that declared anti-Russian goals, that declared its commitment to the principles and practices of Nazism when they bombed Odessa, when they bombed Luhansk, and no one is investigating these crimes. And there are no suggestions to set up tribunals for that. Lastly, a war was started against those who disagreed with the coup d'etat, then the war was stopped, the Minsk agreements were signed, but as you know, Germany and France with Poroshenko, all the three signatories, except Putin, well, they signed it to better prepare Ukraine with weapons and equipment for the next phase. So do you think we didn't put our best foot forward in this particular case? Because we were the only country that sought to make sure that the Minsk agreements were observed, whereas
The others were not so enthusiastic and were simply following the advice from the US. And I think that, well, Greece and Cyprus are suffering because of that. I don't know what they are most suffering from. Because Greece and Cyprus and Russia have always been very close friends, and the transformations that have happened in the leadership of both countries have not gone unnoticed by us. As far as everything that I've just mentioned is concerned, I can say the following. For many years, they have been preparing these efforts, preparing forces to unleash a hybrid warfare against us. And this is all well known. I think prime ministers and presidents of European countries, especially countries that have had long-standing historical ties with Russia, I'm confident that these people know the facts and they know how to analyze that. So, given that, the conclusion I can draw is quite clear. Either they were made or they willingly submitted to the diktat by the US. Europe is following the US orders, and there is not going to be any talk of any strategic autonomy or independence in Europe. They will not be allowed to do that. When Defense Secretary Mr. Austin the US said that more American troops had to move to Europe. He was asked whether that would be on a permanent basis or on a rotation basis, and he said, we are going to decide that in Washington. So we are drawing the conclusions from what's happening. And of course, we have taken note of those who were so hasty to support the aggression against Russia. The war is going to be over sometime, and we'll defend our truth. But what comes next, I do not quite understand yet. It's all going to be dependent on the conclusions that Europe is going to draw. Georgia, please. Alt info.
Вот, сейчас готовы. Слышно? Да?
Слышно.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Добрый день, Сергей Викторович, телекомпания
Alt Info, David Aklavidiani, Georgia,
Господин министр, после начала СВО на Украине все мы наблюдаем, что реально это противостояние коллективного Запада с РФ и не только. В сложном положении оказались и малые страны региона, в том числе Грузия. Постоянные радикальные атаки со стороны политических и медийных групп, контролируемых американцами, стараются насадить аморальные и извращенные ценности западных норм поведения, что чуждо для нашей культуры и идентичности. Тем самым Запад пытается подорвать культурный суверенитет малых стран и обрести контроль над ними. И конечной целью этой циничной политики глобалистов является принесение в жертву этих маленьких стран в угоду своих политических интересов. Вот печальный пример, к сожалению, Украины. Такая же опасность стоит перед Грузией и другими странами региона. И вот вопрос, в этих условиях остро встает вопрос, есть ли у России четкая стратегия против деструктивной культурной экспансии Запада, и подразумевает ли это кооперацию со странами, которые могут быть естественными союзниками в защите консервативных ценностей? Спасибо
большое. Thank you. This is a very broad question. We've just spoken about Ukraine. Yesterday there was a special session of the UN Security Council convened at our initiative. It was dedicated to the threats against international peace and security stemming from the Kiev regime's policies and human rights and the rights of national minorities, including religious minorities and religious rights of national minorities.
Противодействие негативным тенденциям через сохранение традиционных ценностей.
negative trends through preserving cultural values. All of that is directly related to religion, in particular to the activities of the Orthodox Church, in particular the Russian Orthodox Church or the Georgian Orthodox Church. So when the church, which is not an instrument of Russian influence, it's simply a tool to preserve traditions and history, to pass it down generation in, generation out. And when we see that this tool is being destroyed or forbidden, when priests are detained and stripped of their citizenship, we can see that these are the tools the West is resorting to assert its values. And when this happens, we have to take reciprocal measures. In particular, when our journalists, our political scientists, experts who can speak the truth, addressing the Western audiences, and when they come under sanctions, we have to reciprocate as well, but this is not our choice. You remember, during the Cold War, Soviet scientists, American, Western scientists met on a regular basis talking about the relevant issues of today, whereas right now it's almost impossible. You know, sometimes I've got addresses via absolutely unofficial channels, and some political scientists from the West are asking me whether it's possible to set up kind of a seminar or workshop somewhere in the neutral territory so that everyone is able to come. In the past, no one asked for permission. They spoke directly to one another, one institution to another. Whereas right now, our Western partners who used to participate in these exchanges are simply intimidated. They're scared. They're bullied. So I reiterate, I have enormous respect for the position of the Georgian Orthodox Church that is fighting for its values. And on the whole, we've no issue with the Georgian people. Well, yes, there was this issue of 2008. But once again, NATO played its role. In April, during the NATO summit in Bucharest, a declaration was adopted saying that Georgia and Ukraine would be in NATO. And
I don't want to use curse words, but his emotions apparently got the better of him. I'm speaking of Saakashvili, and he decided that he was entitled to do whatever he wanted. And Condoleezza Rice visited, and he ordered to bomb Tsinvala and peacekeepers. Ukrainians took a bit longer for this Bucharest impulse to reach the conscience of those people who chose to expel everything Russian from their territory. We would like to see Abkhazia and South Ossetia build their relations with Georgia. There are dialogue mechanisms that we participate in. Quite a while ago, Georgia came up with the project of joint economic activities and strengthening trust. This is perfectly commendable, and the Western participants of the so-called Geneva discussions between Abkhazia, South Ossetia and Georgia, namely the European Union and the United States, are attempting to make this dialogue format hostage to what is going on in Ukraine. That's simply indecent, let alone unprofessional. It means that for them, specific tasks to be carried out in a specific region are conditional to their political offenses and caprice. I'm happy to see contacts among people on the personal level, develop actively with Georgia. Last year, the Georgian GDP grew by 10%, largely due to tourism and trade relations with Russia. I hope that very soon we will be able to resume direct airline connection, flights between Georgia and Russia, and we see to what extent Georgia, just like the rest of the world, is facing pressure by the West that openly and unashamedly demands that it join sanctions against Russia. This small country and its government have the courage to say that they will be guided by their own interests, economic interests, is once again commendable. Radio Saga, Iceland. Hauksson Haukor, Iceland. Good afternoon, everyone. Just now you were speaking about what is going on in the West. Two questions. How would you comment on the rather interesting statements by Sauli Niinistö, President of Finland, on the New Year when he compared Russia to the cruel Nazi regime? Second question, in the Soviet era they would often speak about imperialism, colonialists and so on, and these words are more and more often used today. There are also neoliberalism, globalism and other new terms. Do you think these words are used in remarks by Mr. Zyuganov of the Communist Party of Russia, but also in your speeches and those by the Russian president? Who is Russia facing today? Who is it opposed to today? Are these notions relevant even today? Or are they now relegated to ancient history? As for the New Year remarks and the following other interview by President Niinistö, well, just as it was the case with Greece and Cyprus, we have considered Finland to be an epitome of friendly relations between our two countries. Even back in the day when those were countries with difficult political and economic systems, social systems, and the rapidity of movement of Finland and Sweden, and I'm more surprised to see that Finland is rapidly changing course and rhetorics, and apparently there has been also a change of heart, or perhaps they have always been anti-Russian, they have just been hiding their anti-Russian position with words about a common European home, respect for the Helsinki Final Act, and expediency of having a summit in Helsinki in 2025 on the 75th anniversary of the OSCE. And I was surprised to see these remarks, because he drew a direct comparison between Putin and Stalin. Putin, just like Stalin attacked Finland, Putin attacked Ukraine, and just like Stalin did in Finland, Putin is going to lose in Ukraine. This monologue was rather primitive, and the allusions to fascist Germany probably reflect the fact that Mr. Niinistö thinks about it quite often. I believe that Finns need to remember their history very well, and the very fact that they were hardly innocent victims to the processes before the Second World War and during that war. It's a shame. It is sad to see that various things that had existed in Europe that were created largely thanks to Finland have been destroyed. And In part, it is due to the activities of Finland itself, especially given that Finland clearly takes pleasure in its quest for NATO membership and is convinced that it will be a security guarantee for them. We will, of course, draw conclusions from Finland and Sweden's joining NATO, if it does happen, and relevant military and technical measures will be taken on our side of the border. As for your second question, neoliberalism and neo-imperialism. Yes, it's about definitions. I did not mention neo-imperialism. It was the person next to you who mentioned that, who alleged that we were acting just like other imperialist powers. It's a matter of taste, actually. As for colonial habits, President Putin spoke about that, and it is a realistic evaluation of what the West is doing at the moment. Colonialism is about seizing someone's territory and living at their expense. This seizure can take many forms. In the 18th century, they would load their ships with slaves, but today they simply subjugate another country, their plans and programs to their own will, just like the US is doing with the EU. Iceland is not an EU member state. You are lucky for that, because the EU has lost its independence. It is a NATO appendage. And the EU is currently making public statements. We are discriminated against. The French Minister of Economics said they needed to motivate Americans to be more mindful of their interests because European industry is paying 4 times more for natural gas than American industries. And the shift to liquefied natural gas, despite the volatility of prices in the long term, probably means that production in Europe is going to become much more costly. Interesting fact is, many years ago, Europeans would demand that we not sign long-term contracts and shift to spot prices. And now, when the Ukrainian situation started and they would look for new energy sources, they started negotiating with Qatar, and Qatar said, all right, but 15-year long-term contract is your minimum. Europeans turned to the US, and yesterday I read that the US said, all right, we'll give you good prices, but only as part of long-term contracts. Therefore, reliability and sustainable prospects are more important than trying to chase the ups and downs of stock exchanges. And European industries are moving to the United States. And Western political scientists say that one of the key goals of what is going on in the world right now, and including around Ukraine, is to decrease Europe's competitiveness and attractiveness as a competitor. This will also influence China and its other competitors at world markets. And naturally, colonialism shows in their relations with developing countries as well. Just look where American investment is going. It is very often tied to various political conditions or placement of American troops.
Не вижу больших отличий, но
I see very little difference here. And since we are at a press conference, I know that many scientists are already studying this new phenomenon, the new era colonialism. It is colonialism as it is. The goals and purposes remain the same, to subjugate someone else and use their resources to serve your interests. And here we have newbies, in the best sense of the word, all world news. Good afternoon, Olga Shetinina. Thank you for the opportunity to ask this question. Diplomacy has a wide variety of tools, including words. Mr. Lavrov, according to you, in 2022, in the world of diplomacy, what word was the most tragic ones? Or the most hopeful one? Or perhaps could you say us the word that the world needs to hear today? Oh, that's a very philosophic question. We are more in the habit of thinking about certain phenomena, and describing what we do is probably your job. Thinking of words, well, the word war, and I'm not afraid to say this word, because what is going on is our response to response that, as our president had said, needed to be given a bit earlier, but it is a response, and it's not too late. It is our response to the hybrid war that was unleashed against us. And this hybrid war is a tool for the West to promote its agenda. As for the word that gives us hope is victory. And what was the third word? Something that the entire world needs to hear. I believe the word victory, once again. Those who want to hear the word negotiations, regrettably, they don't want these negotiations themselves, and they manipulate this term in order to protract this war against Russia. We have a lot of Arab-speaking media. Could we start with RT Arabic?
Добрый день, меня зовут Касаб Мухаммад, RT Arabic.
Kasab Muhammad, RT Arabic. Minister Lavrov, according to you,
государство, внешняя политика РФ,
what is the significance of Arab states in the foreign policy of Russia? Have you reconsidered your priorities regarding such states in 2022? Arabs are our long-term and true friends. We maintain regular contacts on a bilateral level with the Arab League, with the Gulf Cooperation Council. Just yesterday, I took part in another meeting with ambassadors of the Arab League countries. In May, I visited the Arab League headquarters in Cairo. I spoke before all members.